Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the SHERA program overview training. We know you are busy and we appreciate you making the time to join. So we'll give everyone a few minutes to get logged in. While everyone gets settled in, I'd like to spend a few moments walking through a few housekeeping items for you on how you can engage during the training. So we ask that you please mute to avoid any disruptions through the training. If at any point throughout today's session you have any questions, please send those in the Q&A. And we do have designated times throughout the session for questions. Please leverage the Q&A functionality during the times we have designated for those questions. And if we don't get back to everyone's questions during the session, we will make sure to get back to you, and we have a frequently asked questions for SHERA program that we will update based on your questions today. So we'll give another moment or so for folks to join. So today's session will be recorded. If you object to being recorded, please disconnect from the session. You can always reach out to us and we can work with you, work out another way to get you this information to make sure that you have the overview program information on SHERA. So to introduce ourselves, my name is Robert Malo. I'm an asset management redevelopment specialist at DHCD. I'm joined by McQueen Clerger, who is subsidized housing program coordinator, also at DHCD. And we're also receiving support from Accenture, who is supporting DHCD with the rollout of SHERA, the Subsidized Housing Emergency Rental Assistance Program. So we have a whole team ready to support you and your staff as you get up to speed and comfortable with SHERA. And again, please ask us any questions that you might have during the designated times. So we'll start today by reviewing our training goals and objectives. Then we'll go into the program overview of SHERA. Next, we'll talk about who is eligible, what documentation is required, and discuss the SHERA pre-screening process. And then finally, we will review some key reminders and end with some time for questions. So our goal today is to provide you with an understanding of SHERA, both the program and its policies, and provide better support for property owners and residents that are eligible for SHERA as they apply for assistance. So before we get into the program materials, we did want to engage the audience and ask you what role do you play at your property or your site? So before we get started, if you wanted to participate, you can actually go to menti.com on your smartphone or computer and enter the code 20717236 into the field in your computer. And if you don't mind answering that question, just give us a better understanding of who's in the audience today. And we'll give you a few moments to participate. Okay, we see a few responses coming in, property management staff and other. And we'll give you a few more moments to participate in the Menti poll of what role you play at your property. Okay, so it's overwhelmingly property management staff, at least participating in the poll. So that's great to see. We through SHERA have engaged most with both property management staff as well as resident services staff and coordinators. So certainly this will be applicable for you in better understanding the program. So thank you for participating in the poll. So just an overview of SHERA. SHERA is a federally funded emergency housing assistance program for renters impacted by COVID-19. So at this time, SHERA is helping residents of both public and affordable housing clear rent arrears from April 1st, 2020 to March 31st, 2021. And there's actually an asterisk there. We will be extending the funding period beyond March 31st of this year. So in the coming weeks, we will provide updated policy regarding that. But currently, the eligible arrears that SHERA can pay for is through that time period. And the key benefit that SHERA provides is that qualified owners of these rent restricted properties are able to apply for assistance on the accounts of their eligible tenants in a single bulk application. So SHERA is a collaboration between the Commonwealth and qualifying owners of housing with income-based rental subsidies on behalf of their tenants. As I mentioned, the property owner or the management agent applies for the assistance on behalf of their tenants with rent arrears for that time period, April 1st, 2020 through March 31st, 2021. And as I stated earlier, there will be updated policy regarding additional months that this program will cover. So by applying for SHERA assistance, the owner continues their pledge to not evict residents for non-payment of rent. The program also relieves the burden of regional administering agencies and the RAP Center, both of which are administering the state's other emergency rental assistance programs, ERAP and RAFT, since tenants will not need to apply individually for assistance. Again, the property owner or their designated property manager is applying on behalf of their residents and are able to provide a single application for multiple residents at the same time. In the SHERA program, owners are continued to encourage to refer their residents to the RAs for other benefits, such as utilities and moving expenses. If, for example, the resident does decide to relocate, SHERA pays for rent arrears only. SHERA is a collaboration between the Commonwealth DHCD, Mass Housing, and Mass Housing Partnership. And there is a administration partnership between the three agencies to provide this assistance and to spread the word about this assistance for eligible residents to participate. So I just wanted to go through kind of the general journey that an owner would take when participating in the SHERA program. So this slide outlines that process for applying for and receiving the assistance. So owners that are pre-screening will be required to pre-screen their properties before applying for SHERA. We'll get into what the pre-screen means in a few slides. Once the owner has successfully pre-screened, they will be invited to register on the SHERA portal. The SHERA portal is an online system where you will ultimately register your properties, your users, and submit applications. Once you're registered on the SHERA portal, you would begin tenant-facing interactions. And at that point, you will be able to submit tenant applications for the SHERA program. We encourage you to attend program outreach sessions before beginning this process to discuss the program with your residents. These outreach sessions will cover topics such as communicating with tenants, gathering application materials, and submitting the application via the SHERA portal. Once the applications are submitted, they are reviewed. Approvals and denials will be communicated to the property owner, the users that are actually submitting the application on the resident's behalf. And the owner has the responsibility of informing the resident of their outcome of their application. So I'll turn it over to McQueen, who will go into owner eligibility.
Thanks, Rob. Let's talk in detail about owner eligibility. The first criteria owners must meet is the threshold eligibility. To meet this criteria, the owner must satisfy one of the following 3 conditions. The owner has an existing borrower relationship with Mass Housing or Massachusetts Housing Partnership, and their sponsor is in good standing with Mass Housing and MHP. Sponsors is a public/local housing authority, or the sponsor has at least one property subject to use restrictions due to participation in a state or federal program that has 20 or more rental housing units. Next, the owner must meet criteria 2 and 3. Criteria 2 requires that the owner's sponsor be in good standing. Owners and their authorized property managers must be in good standing with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and the federal government. The owner entity and its authorized management agent, if applicable, must submit a certificate of good standing from the Massachusetts Secretary of State. Entities will also be checked against the state and federal list. Criteria 3 requires that owners or their designated representative must have 3 years compliance experience and at least one staff member holding certification and compliance training recognized by the affordable housing industry. The 4th criteria for eligibility is signing the owner agreement. The owner agreement outlines their responsibilities and commitments. These commitments include applying for the benefit to the tenant account within 30 days of receipt of assistant payment, suspend currently in process evictions and not initiate new evictions for non-payment of rent against household eligible for SHERA for at least 6 months after the last assistant payment is applied to a tenant's account. Reach out proactively to households who are behind in their rent, engage proactively with residents in arrears to create payment plans, promote program access to residents, support resident applications for rental assistance payments, and accept payments when made. Owners also commit to providing downward rent adjustments for income-based rents as applicable, encourage structured and interactive pre-court mediation, including use of the state-funded no-cost community mediation program, inform tenants when applicants are submitted, when payments are received and applied, and if a payment is denied, instruct auditors to incorporate protocols into their 2021 property audits for review of SHERA funding application and payments, and repay SHERA funds if such payment is duplicate or out of compliance. Lastly, owners commit to obtain and retain required documentation on tenant eligibility, submit all required reports and requests through an online owner portal, certify with each submission that all information is correct and complete, be subject to compliance reviews. Okay, now let's take a look at property and household eligibility. We'll begin with what makes a property eligible for SHERA. Eligible owners can submit applications for properties meeting the following criteria. Criteria 1, subsidized housing. Under SHERA, eligible properties are income-restricted affordable rental housing properties owned by eligible owners that A, receive state or federal subsidies in the forms of grants, soft loans, tax credit, or zoning obtained under chapters 40B or 40R to subsidize their construction and or rehabilitation, and are subject to a recorded use restriction held by the Commonwealth or another state public agency, or by the property if the property was developed under the chapter 40B or 40R. Or B, currently receive project-based rental assistance under contracts administered by the Commonwealth or other state public agencies. Criteria 2, properties eligible for assistance must be subject to annual audit. This audit may be for a single purpose owner entity. For sponsor entities, in the case of wholly owned owner entities whose properties are reflected in the owner's organizational audit, or in the case of local housing authorities, the agreed upon procedures report. Mixed income properties. While many eligible properties contain both income restricted and market rate units, the non-restricted units might possibly be occupied by low-income residents. Owners are encouraged to apply for assistance for those households, provided that the owner can document that their current incomes are at or below 80% AMI. Scattered sites. A scattered site property is eligible if at least some housing units are restricted to households at 80% AMI or less. Now let's spend some time talking about tenant household eligibility. For a tenant to be eligible for assistance through SHERA, they must meet the following criteria. They must be able to demonstrate a risk of experienced homelessness or housing instability. The household has an income at or below 80% AMI. The household has experienced a financial hardship due to COVID, and the household has rent arrears between April 1st, 2020 and March 31st, 2021 until further guidance is given. And I will pass this back to Rob.
Thank you, McQueen. So we'll talk a little bit about required documentation for the program. So while SHERA takes the burden off of applying for the resident, there are still some required documents that they may need to provide the owner. The owner will need records of income documentation, including most recent income certification or documentation of benefits or documentation of income. The resident also has to provide a certification, a signed certification that identifies whether or not they've been impacted by COVID-19, that they have not received other emergency rental assistance, that provides the owner permission to apply on their behalf, and confirming the assistance amount that they're applying for. And other information, the tenant does need to provide the last four of their social security number. However, a resident does not need a social security number to be eligible for the program. And finally, as required by the Treasury, the resident is providing some demographic data. So for an owner to certify income, they can rely on documentation already provided for 2020 or 2021 if the property is otherwise conducting income recertifications as part of their subsidy program. If a recertification has not been completed, the tenant can provide any one of the following documents. So this includes documentation of annual income, a filed 2020 IRS Form 1040, or 1040-EZ, one covering each adult household member over 18, if they're filing separately. The household can also provide a documentation of benefits. So this includes a benefit letter for households receiving veterans benefits under Chapter 115, subsidized childcare, DTA benefits, or mass health benefits. So in lieu of providing a recertification, the household can provide documentation of any of these benefits to verify income eligibility. And then finally, the household can provide documentation of monthly income for 2 months prior to the application. So this documentation of income includes unemployment benefit checks or bank statements, a Social Security benefit letter, or if the household members are employed, at least 2 pay stubs. So we'll take a closer look at the tenant certification of rental assistance eligibility. So this is the form that the head of household would sign to participate in the program and to consent for the owner to apply on their behalf. So there are a few data points here that may not reside in the property management system that many owner operators have been using to help populate the SHERA application. So as part of the form, there are sections on language proficiency, gender, race and ethnicity, as well as method of communication preferences. So as part of this form, the head of household is certifying that they are a resident of the unit and that they were directly or indirectly impacted by COVID-19. So to be directly or indirectly impacted does not necessarily mean that they received, that they've got the virus, but that their life was impacted because of COVID-19. For example, a job loss, or if their job hours were cut, or required to take care of family during the pandemic. In the form, the tenants are asked to specify the months for which they owe rent and provide the total dollar amount of arrears they owe. And as previously mentioned, the resident is also certifying that they have not received any other government assistance for the same rent arrears that they are applying for under SHERA. So the owner does have responsibilities to provide certain tenant notifications. Once the owner has applied for the resident on their behalf, the owner operator is required to provide notice that the application has been submitted. There also may need to be additional documentation required either from the owner to verify eligibility or from DHCD when the application is reviewed. So there may need to be an additional notification for that resident to provide that additional documentation. The owner is also responsible for notifying the resident when they're approved and when the payment is applied to their account. So on our website, we do have a form. We have template letters on all of these notifications. And for example, the application approval and payment notice does include an area for the specific dollar amount of rental arrearages that were applied and the amount of reimbursement that the owner has received, as well as the months for which the payments have been applied to the tenant's account. If an owner submits an application and that application is denied by DHCD, DHCD does send the denial notice both to the resident and the owner. So I'll talk a bit about administrative reviews. So this would happen when a resident is submitting their information, their income documentation, as well as the tenant certification at what we call the pre-application stage. So before the owner operator is submitting the application in the SHERA portal. So owners are expected to review the information to determine whether the household is eligible or not to apply for SHERA. And in the event of the owner finds that the household is ineligible, they're expected to work with a resident who does ask for a review of that determination. So as far as an administrative review, if an owner does find the tenant ineligible, the owner must notify the tenant immediately and follow the administrative review process. Two things that I will point out in terms of eligibility regarding the financial hardship is the owner must accept the tenant household's attestation of financial hardship due to COVID-19. So for example, the owner should not be deeming a household ineligible based on their self-attestation. The only reason a current ineligible, I apologize. The only reason a current tenant ineligible is due to overincome or back rents from an ineligible period, meaning their arrears were accrued prior to April 1st, or the household is over 80% of the area median income. So in the event of an ineligibility determination from an owner, the tenant has 15 calendar days to submit a request for an administrative review. The request must be in writing. Once a request for administrative review is received, the owner is expected to designate someone else who did not make the initial determination to review all submitted documentation and to determine whether the tenant is eligible for SHERA. If the administrative review determines that a tenant is eligible, the owner must submit an application on behalf of the tenant through the SHERA portal and notify the tenant of that submission. If the owner makes the determination after the administrative review that the household is ineligible, the owner is still encouraged to provide notice to the resident of any change in circumstance that might make them eligible in the future, as well as provide the resident with other available rental assistance resources, including information on the no-cost pre-court community mediation program, as well as ERAP and RAF. So I'll talk a bit about the pre-screening process for properties specifically that are 40B properties, 40R properties, or local action units. These property types are required to pre-screen for the SHERA program. So what pre-screening does is it provides the owner with, it provides the agency with the required contact information and the ability to confirm that the property is eligible. And ultimately, it provides the owner operator with the project identifications it needs in order to register in the SHERA portal. So as I mentioned, the pre-screening applies to those Chapter 40B, Chapter 40R, or local housing, I apologize, local action units that are participating in the program. So to pre-screen, the owner will be asked to do a few things. One is confirming the audit frequency and that the property is in good standing. Second is certifying compliance monitoring and that each participating property has an affordable housing restriction in effect. The third is providing a Form W-9. And then additionally, an owner may be asked to provide evidence of the portfolio size if the property that they are applying for has fewer than 20 units. And lastly, if a property has multiple buildings with different addresses, providing an address list for each of those buildings. So the pre-screening is done online through an online form submission. And once you have successfully pre-screened, you will receive the following information to register in the SHERA portal. First is instructions on how to register and how to submit bulk applications. Second is links to training and key support materials, both engaging with residents and participating in the SHERA program. And then third is the unique project ID for each property that was successfully pre-screened. If you've submitted a property that was not successfully pre-screened, you will still receive email confirmation, including the reasons why that property is not eligible, as well as additional emergency rental assistance options available for your residents. So we have some time to review some reminders and avenues for support before wrapping up with questions. So we are providing additional training opportunities that will be available in the coming weeks to support you and your teams participating in the SHERA program. Invitations will be shared, so you know when these trainings are and how to register. The application readiness session is next. We will send out an email to everyone that's participated today to confirm the date of that readiness session. We also have a technical session on how to use the portal, the actual front page of how to submit that bulk application, how to register your properties and register users. So we do have a recorded video on using the portal, as well as a complete walkthrough and navigating through that portal to make sure that you're comfortable with using the page when you're submitting applications and registering your properties. So that information is available on our website. And as I mentioned, we will provide a confirmation email of the application readiness session in the next few days. So for resources, we strongly encourage you to visit sherafunding.mass.gov. There is, excuse me, that will take you to the actual SHERA portal. And there is on the portal a link where you can visit our webpage with policy guidance, as well as template notifications and form letters that you can use while implementing the program. There's also the application itself is available, so you can check out the actual data points that are required to submit a bulk application, as well as some other tips and tricks and best practices from owners that have already begun to participate in the program and how they've organized and implemented the program at their properties. And as I mentioned, strongly encouraged to view those resources. If you still have support questions, you can certainly reach out to us. We ask that you submit a support ticket, and those are located on the portal itself. You can navigate onto the portal and click the request for help button, and you can ask any kind of question you like there, policy. If there's any technical questions that you have, we do our best to make sure that we're responsive to those questions. So if you do have any follow-up questions, you can also submit a support ticket through the portal. Okay, so we have plenty of time for questions, and we will open the floor for anyone with questions.
Thanks, Rob, and thanks, McQueen. I can go ahead and read out a couple of questions we have in the chat. So I think this is specific to a particular group. So it says we have cooperative properties that had a mortgage with Mass Housing, but the mortgage has since been paid off with no mortgage on the property. We have still not received a project ID for this site located in Beverly, Massachusetts. How will we obtain this information for this property? And then this same person asks, we also have properties with multiple phases where we have not received all of our project IDs. Are multiple phases covered under one project ID? And in any case, or should we have a separate one for each 10? Rob, do you want to take this one? We might have to respond to some of it offline just to get more specifics, but I think we can speak to the question around if multiple phases require different project IDs.
Sure. So I agree. I think, Scott, we can follow up with you on the specifics offline on that particular property. But basically, we're rolling out SHERA in phases. So Phase 3 includes those property types that I had mentioned prior. And what we're doing is with each phase, we're provisioning project IDs. So if your property was not part of the first phase or the second phase, you would not have received the invitation for that particular property. You also would not have received the provision project ID. So as Antija mentioned, Scott, we'll want to make sure that we're looking at the correct property you're referring to, just to confirm whether or not that particular property has its ID, or if it's in phase 3, this phase that we're discussing today, and should go through the pre-screening process.
Thanks, Rob. The next question we have is this for subsidized units only?
Yes, the program is for affordable housing rental units with an affordable housing use restriction on the property to ensure affordability for housing for households. Is not a program for all market rate units, with the exception that mixed income units with an affordable housing restriction can still apply, and those market rate units within the affordable housing project are still eligible for SHERA, so long as they meet the requirements of the program. They're at or below 80% of AMI. They provide the tenant certification and permission to apply for their owner to apply on their behalf. That said, this is generally for a program for subsidized housing.
Thanks, Rob. Do we have any other questions for our speakers today? While we wait for questions, I do want to reiterate, I know that on the slide, the session for the application readiness appears as June 22nd. We will get an updated date and an invitation out to everyone who received an invitation for this session. While we wait for questions, Rob, is there any portion of the presentation that you want to put some extra emphasis on?
Sure, I would put emphasis first on the bulk application. The way that the program was designed is the residents that are eligible, having those residents included as part of that bulk application and submitted in the SHERA portal for those months of arrears. There is no limit on how many residents you can submit with a single application. You can also submit multiple applications. So if another resident is falling behind on their payments, it's not just you can only submit one application and no further. You can submit as many applications as you want, but we did want to provide a kind of a bulk submission process so that the households can receive the assistance as quickly as possible. Currently, we're about from application submission to payment about 18 days. So there is a fairly quick turnaround for payments being made. So I did want to focus on that. And then as far as the pre-screening process goes, we, as Antija mentioned, we will be providing a link to the online form that you can complete, and including that general information. And the reason for the pre-screen is just to ensure that the properties are meeting those eligibility criteria before accepting registrations and applications in the SHERA portal.
Thanks, Rob. We had a question come in around if the presentation will be made available. Yes, this presentation and other materials to support you to learn more about SHERA are available on the SHERA program information site. We have another question that just came in. It says, similar to the previous question / statement, have not received an email regarding our pre-screen property eligibility. Should I send another email inquiring status? So Rob, do you want to take this one? We haven't sent the email for pre-screening at this time for properties that fall into phase 3. But Rob, if you want to add some more commentary there.
That appropriately summarizes it. Sharon, you should be on the lookout for an email within the next couple of days with that invitation and a link to the pre-screen form.
All right, if there aren't any more questions, I'll move forward with just sharing a link to that program information page that I spoke about. You can use this to find more information about the program and templates to communicate with your residents. And then Rob also mentioned if you have any questions that you can submit a service ticket to get support. So I'll drop a link to where you can submit those service request tickets in the chat as well. And we'll give it a couple more seconds to see if there are any more questions. Well, if there are no more questions at this time, I think we can move forward with wrapping up. So thank you all for joining. And as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the service request link that has been provided, and we will send out an invitation to the next session very soon. Thank you all for joining today.